Risk. Like Sam said, it's a calculation we do in our heads all the time. And in general, we try, those of us who aren't addicted to adrenaline or suicidal, we try to keep risk down to a low hum, at least when we're confronted with a clear and obvious one. Which is one reason, as he hinted, that this virus is so scary. Like all viruses, it's invisible to the naked eye. It hangs out on doorknobs and coffee pots at work. It lingers on the change the corner store clerk hands us. It dances ominously on the breath of hello and crosses the distance between us at 200 miles an hour when one of us sneezes. Plus, the virus is pretty awful once it breaks through our wall of defenses, or it can be. It exhausts or turns our toes red at the very least, but also can fill our lungs, dangerously inflames the tissues of our children, decimates nursing homes, and we still don't know all of how it works or why. For many people, getting this virus, well, it's an awful bet to lose, maybe the loss that takes all our previous winnings off the table in one fell swoop and sends us home. And it makes so much of ordinary daily life a pretty dangerous spin of the wheel. We don't like these kinds of risks as humans. No upside if we win, except that we get to continue living, and an awful array of downsides if and when we lose. I'm someone who likes to live reducing my risk and who thinks, and always has, a lot about it. It's my be prepared philosophy, drilled into me by, I think, mostly my adoring and sweetly protective father. How does it show up, this philosophy of life? Well, let me just give you one of many examples I could give you. Every time I am at the beach, I wonder at least once, and often, if I'm being honest with you, more than once, whether there might be a shark in the waters, and I regularly scan underneath and around my feet to see if anything seems to be circulating there. Well, for this sermon, since we're talking about risk, I decided to look up how much of a risk this really is, this thing that's occupied so much of my time at the otherwise beautiful beaches of my life. It turns out, maybe you already know this, that adjusted only to include those who actually swim in the ocean, your and my chance in the United States of being attacked by a shark is annually 1 in 11.5 million. And our chance of death from such an attack? Well, we just heard of such a death recently in California, so I imagine for you, like me, it looms large in our imaginations. But it turns out it only happens once every other year in the United States. Globally, there are between 7 and 8 deaths annually from shark attacks. 7 and 8. Far more dangerous, twice as dangerous, it turns out, is falling icicles. 15 people a year globally die at the hand of an icicle. And even more dangerous than that is the infamous champagne cork. 24 people die every year from a wayward champagne cork, often at weddings, so be careful. It's not just dancing the YMCA that can be difficult and wounding on your soul and body. It's those openings of the bottles. Ants, meanwhile, kill about 50 people a year, which is nothing compared to the coconut, which takes 150 lives a year on average, falling generally on unsuspecting people's heads. Elephants? I mean, they're smart and cute and committed to their loved ones, so we have a soft spot for them, but they do take 600 human lives a year, which is nothing compared to the hippo, who takes 2,900 humans a year. While the tiny, whiny mosquito kills 800,000 people a year with the diseases it spreads. This, by the way, would be a bad example of how the small can be mighty. So please use David and Goliath or some other story when you want to capture that important moral lesson. Now, if you happen to be sitting at home thinking smugly that you don't drink champagne, and you don't take siestas under coconut trees, or swim in the ocean, or go near hippos, then, my fellow Americans, let me give you this piece of advice. Please do not sleep in a bed. Because every year, 450 Americans die falling out of their beds. Obviously, there are other more serious stats on risk that we might consider when we're thinking about the unthinkable. How 1 in 5 of us will die from cancer in our lifetimes. How 1 in 5 women will be raped in her lifetime, and 1 in 71 men. I remember a college professor, a religion professor of mine, Lee Yearley, who taught at Stanford and still does, I was delighted to see recently, when he asked us all to write down on a piece of paper what we predicted would happen in our lives in the next 10 years. Then he asked us to share about it, and people talked about what they expected to fall in love, or get advanced degrees, or see the world, or buy a new car. And when we were done, Professor Yearley, even then with a white beard, said, "What about death? Will none of you lose a loved one in the next 10 years? You almost certainly will. Will none of you get fired from a job? Will none of you develop an addiction?" We somehow expect the good, he was saying, but we conveniently forget what else might come our way. And yet life has this way of throwing us hardship, and everything is a risk, the sage professor was trying to tell all of us young people. Get a job, kid, and you're at risk of losing it, right? That's part of what it means to be in the game. Love someone, and they're going to break your heart, and you might lose them. Buy a car, you risk an accident. Have 2 drinks, that chance just doubled, and have 2 more, and well, the risk is exponentially high. Some days lately, it feels to me like there's this collective waking up we've all done to the realities of risk. And we've all got our calculators on, and they're hot from constant use. I know mine is. We're calculating how long does risk live on a metal car door? And what about on the mail that just got delivered? And do I need to wipe my groceries down with Clorox wipes, the ones I can no longer find at the store? And if someone walks by me lazily walking their dog and neither of us is wearing a mask, what's the viral load coming out of them, and how likely is it to get me sick? And what about the runner who just went by? And what about being 8 feet from where Asher just sang in the sanctuary, in a place with soaring ceilings and not quite for an hour, in a service once a week? What about all of that? Is it reasonable? Of course. It's reasonable to wonder, to obsess even, to figure out how to limit the dangers to ourselves and others, but we may not all be vaccinated until May of next year. That's what our denominational president is asking us to hold out as one possibility. And can we live a whole other year in a bubble? People will have to take risks. Some have been since it started. So, in thinking about this, I've been wondering about what it would mean to remember, to steady ourselves, remembering what that professor of mine tried to teach all of his students all these years ago, that life is inherently risky business, that it always has been. That the Buddhist teaching I heard once, that when someone gives you a bowl, imagine it broken, that it's a metaphor for life, right? That what's been given to us, well, it's always been fragile. It's always a coconut falling, a wipe of the nose, a distracted street crossing away from being over. And so, bigger than our precautions, what if we sat deeply as religious people with that? Because, by the way, did you know that heavy stress can take 2.3 years off your life? So we have to find a good way to hold all of this. And I know some of you are working on that. Schooled by COVID and other surprise losses of this time, Daniel Jackaway, who's head of our worship associates, he wrote me this week words that strike me as worth sharing, and he's agreed to let them be shared. About what he's been learning from all of what he's been living with, Daniel wrote, "What I've seen in the short run, and I hope I can hold on to, is clarity. Clarity that focuses me on gratitude for what I have. Acceptance that not everything is perfect. And just the right amount of urgency to do what's important to me in life. Cherishing the bounty and the opportunities in front of me while I can, before something changes." How do you live when you know in your bones what has always been true? That life is risky business. Because for this one, our calculators don't help.